Well, welcome to A Stranger, a Suitcase and a Story. I'm Anton van der Walt, and with me is my co-host and fellow explorer, Ben Liebenberg. Hello, Ben. How are you doing?
Yes, Anton. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Just before I go on to describe this pod a little bit further to get context for those maybe listening for the first time, our last recording that we did was just absolutely extraordinary. The story that we heard from John was so great, and I really, really enjoyed it. And so if you listen to this pod now, go and find that on our website, 3spod.com. It's pretty easy to find and subscribe, because John's story is a very profound story of resilience. The interesting thing, John is a South African Chinese, and we talked a little bit about his ancestry and everything like that, which was quite fascinating. And what didn't come into the podcast, which was quite interesting, was that he said to us offline that when he arrived in Sydney, it was like a huge eye-opener for him, because Sydney is very cosmopolitan and a lot of Chinese and Asian people in Sydney, and it felt to him like he was home in a sense of there's so many Chinese people here, which was not the case in South Africa. Mm-hmm. But anyway.
Actually said for the first time in his life he felt what it felt like not to be the minority.
That's right. That's what he said. It was such a profound statement.
Very good.
Yeah, it was so good. Yes, this podcast where we unpack the real stories of migration, identity and belonging. Whether you made this leap or are thinking about it or simply curious, you're in the right place. Each story reveals what we hold on to, what we leave behind, and what we find along the way. And today we joined with someone whose journey brings new heart and perspective to it all. Our guest today is Ryan Walker. Ryan has been in Australia for quite a bit. He grew up in Johannesburg and lives in the outer regions of Sydney now. He said to me that what brought him to the country was work and opportunities. And he has got a funny story to tell us about how he locked his apartment the first time that he came here. Ryan is an enterprise leader in the technology sector. Ryan, welcome. Really great and stoked to have you on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anton, for inviting me. Thank you very much, Ben. I feel quite humbled to be here and share my story. I think, as you said, all of us have our unique story and unique way that we got here, and funny things that happened to us along the way, and also the reasons why we're here. So I feel very, very privileged to tell my story. You'll see my story is one that's interwoven with lots of blessings, lots of opportunities. And then, as you say, there's things we hold on to, things we gravitate towards. And just really excited to share my story. And thank you very much.
Great. I'm looking forward to today. Really am.
Yeah. So before I unleash Ben on you, I just wanted to, when we reached out to people to join the pod, Ryan, you were such an early adopter originally and said, yes, it wasn't a question. You didn't want to know more. You said this is a great idea. Why did you say that?
I just think, as you said, all of us have our unique story. And my unique story, I'm a devout Christian. And my story was actually something that was a God's calling. And you'll see it when I tell the story. I've been blessed so much by coming to Australia, and it was actually a calling that both my wife and I got when we were back in South Africa. There were certain things that were happening to me at the time. Mm-hmm. I'd always wanted to come to Australia. I always felt it in my heart to come here. And even though it was really hard for me to leave certain things behind, since I've been here, I think both from a personal perspective with my family and also from a business perspective, you'll see there's a calling on my life, be blessed to be a blessing. And that certainly has just happened. Just hopefully what I share today touches some people that are actually sitting in South Africa, and they get to experience the same, because it really was a calling on my life and on my family's life.
Well, I would love to get into that. And so I think we usually start somewhere much earlier, Ben.
Yeah, we just like to get to know you a bit, get to know where you're from, what makes you, where you grew up, all those kind of things. So tell us a little bit about, how you grew up, and share a little bit of that story with us.
Yeah, so I grew up in Johannesburg in Roodepoort. My first home was on Durban Roodepoort Deep Mine. And I actually grew up in a home with my grandparents and my mother. I only met my dad when I was 21. I always knew who he was, where he came from. My dad was a professional soccer player in South Africa in the early 70s. He played for Highlands Park. He played for Rangers, but unfortunately, just due to him being so good at football and those sorts of things, alcoholism creeped into that, and I ended up living with my grandparents and my mother. My grandfather was a foreman blacksmith. He was a very hard man, a very big man. Also, an extremely good rugby player. Played for Western Transvaal. Knew Felix du Plessis, Morne du Plessis' father. Played rugby with him. Played Springbok Trials, 1949. Was
Oh,
part of
wow.
Springbok Trials. He still had a story where he actually took the Springbok Trial jersey home, and the police ended up knocking on his door 24 hours later because that was the property of the state and he could not take the trial jersey home. And that's how important it was in those days. And I think everything I am today has a lot to do with my upbringing with my grandparents and my mother. I've got some very old school values that have been taught to me by them. I was always absolutely surrounded by love. Love was the ultimate part of my upbringing. I was quite spoilt with love. I wasn't necessarily spoilt with monetary things. And I grew up with them. I got given every opportunity to do the things I did. I fortunately myself was pretty decent at sport. I represented Transvaal back in those days in running, in cross country. I represented them in soccer, in tennis. I also played Transvaal under 21 rugby. I was deputy head boy, both primary and high school, and did fairly well academically. So I loved my schooling years. I loved how I grew up. I loved the region I grew up as well. I think it taught me a lot of things, a lot of hard things. It wasn't necessarily an easy place to grow up. Being South African, we all understand it. It's over there. I think, especially in the earlier years, men were slightly harder because of the army and that. There was very much a sense of, you went through initiation, you didn't question authority, you went through as a youngster, you had ultimate respect for your teachers. To this day, if I see my teachers when I go back to South Africa, I still call them sir. It's just not in me to call them by their first names. A lot of those characteristics is what makes us South Africans succeed. I think for me, even though a lot of people feel that they're quite old school values, I think those old school values is actually what's missing in society at the moment. So, my junior years were, as I say, filled with sport, filled with academics.
Did you go to, if I may
I
ask?
went to a normal public school in Onondekkers. Yeah, we were the English school that kind of competed against all the Afrikaans schools around us.
Right, I was in the Randburg Hoërskool, so
Oh,
that's
okay.
why.
Yeah. And then also, I guess from my side, I've got very strong Afrikaans heritage. My grandfather's real name was Casper Jan Hendrik Dempers. And even though I went to an English school, I had very staunch Afrikaans kind of roots and ended up going to Rau. Played rugby at Rau. Everyone who listens to this podcast in South Africa, my nickname was Soutpeel. And they also used to call me Engelsman because
That's right.
I was the only one in my Rau rugby side that was doing a Bachelor of Science in Information Technology. All of the rest of the guys who were bought and had come through Craven Week were all doing BA Sports Psychology. And they all used to mock me because I was the only one that was really there studying while they were there doing BA Sports Psychology and playing rugby. But I've always had very staunch Afrikaans heritage in my blood, even though I went to English schools. And just enjoyed sport, enjoyed education, and enjoyed South Africa.
So fair to say, it sounds like you're a bit of an underachiever, eh?
Yeah, I've always been someone that kind of pushes myself quite hard. I think even today, that's one thing I battle with. I think that's one thing that's just born in people or not born in people. I'm quite blessed to say that my daughter here in Australia is the same. She runs for New South Wales. She's vice school captain. She basically does everything at the school. And I think that's either born in you or it's not born in you. It's just one of those traits that I have.
So what years were you in?
I went to Rau from 1999 until 2003.
Okay.
So I'm still fairly young, 44 years old. As I say, I've got older school values because I've been brought up in Rudaput and by my grandfather. As I say, he was a blacksmith. There were certain things that still to this day, I look back and I just smile and I just think, wow, he taught me so much of being a man, being a man's man. I think a lot of that gets blurred today. They don't want men to be men.
Let's ask that question because you talk about old school values. Tell us about what do you mean by those?
Just first and foremost, I said to you, I'm a devout Christian. I think God rules our home and God is the ultimate provider to us. I think in today's society, things come too easy and people don't realize that there is God, there is Jesus. He died for our sins, and that's the reason why we're here, and that's the reason why we're placed on earth.
Yeah.
Other old school values are just, simple things like everything in life doesn't come easy. You got to work for these things. Like nothing in life comes easy. If you don't work for it, you don't get it. You can't be handed things on a silver platter. And I think that's another thing that makes me a little bit, not angry, but like annoyed about modern day society is that there's a lot of people out there that blame their past or blame something, or it's someone else's fault, or it's something why I don't have. Whereas it's no, yes, we all get given our own thing in life. We all get given our own hardships. As I said, I grew up with a single mom. I certainly didn't have a lot of money. And I could have blamed a whole lot of things and my life could have turned out. But you've got to work for it and you've got to take accountability. You've got to take accountability for your actions. And he taught me that. And he also taught me other certain things, respect for your family, how to be the provider for your family, to not be late. That's a pet peeve of mine. You don't be late for meetings. Other things, shoes polished. Don't come with your shoes out not polished. I've still got to think about that. I'm unshaven today. In my younger years, it used to be you go for interviews, you go for things, make sure you're shaven, make sure you present yourself like you want people to see. And I think those little things, those 1%ers, are the things that are the differential between ordinary and good. And I think that's what he taught me, really. And that's what my grandmother taught me as well. She was just an amazing woman. She was the first manager of Price Forbes back in those days. She worked and she helped run the family with my grandfather. Super clever lady.
Yep. So you did mention it, but I assume you went to the army. Where did you go?
No, I actually didn't go to the army. I did cadets. But I've got a family that's got deep army heritage. So my uncle was an officer in the army. My father was a recce in the army. My father-in-law, he was a parabat and he actually saw Kasinga. He got dropped at Kasinga. So all the men in my life were all army backgrounds. Yeah, you know what that means. I mentioned the army because that's how I got brought up. I got brought up around it. I got brought up around those stories. And I got brought up with that sort of discipline. And when I mean discipline, good discipline, as a boy, as a man, I firmly believe that you need other men in your life to guide you and to give you that discipline. Otherwise, in your teenage years, you think you are indestructible, but you actually are not indestructible. And you need those men to guide you and give you those principles. Yeah, that's where the reference to the army comes in, is all the men around me. I did cadets, but I didn't see any service.
Yeah, all good. So you finished your university and then started working around Johannesburg?
Yeah, so that was an interesting story as well. So in my third year of uni, I got a bursary first 2 years at Rao because of my marks. And then in the third year, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a bursary anymore. And you guys know South Africa, you have to fund yourself. So I had to go and get a bank loan. And my grandfather had a rule that he never signed surety for anything or anyone because it would jeopardize or put his family at risk. And I went to him and I said, look, Grandpa, it's third year, you know what that means. And he always used to reference it because in the mine, they used to get something called their ticket. It was their, I don't know what it was, but think of it as in TAFE today, you get your apprenticeship and then you get your ticket. And he always used to say to me, my boy, you got to get your ticket. You got to get your ticket. And he said to me, I'll sign surety for you. That's fine. I'll sign surety. You've got a bank loan my last year of uni. And then about 4 months in, as I said, I never grew up with a lot of money. He looked at me and he came to me and said, look, I'm sorry about this, but things are getting a bit tough and you're still living here. He said, I want you to get your ticket. Just look at me. I want you to get it, but you're going to have to go and work. And I said, okay, Grandpa, I understand. So I then went to go and work full time while studying full time, doing my BSc IT I was 21. I started work for Konica Minolta, selling photocopiers. So I became a photocopier rep, direct photocopier rep. Wow. Knocking on doors, worked Monday to Friday, stole lecture notes from all my mates.
So there's a university degree in its own.
So then I studied on the weekends and still managed to get my degree. I ended up doing so well at sales. I won Quota Club and I'd never been on an aeroplane until the age of 21 and I won this trip to go to Argentina, which was one of 10 people to go to Argentina. They gave us 10,000 Rand spending money and
Wow.
a trip to Argentina. And I was just over the moon because obviously first time in a plane, first time overseas, and someone to give me 10,000 Rand to go and spend overseas with a bunch of blokes was just like amazing to me. And then, as I say, I ended up getting my degree. It's the only time in my life that I've seen my grandfather cry. I'll never forget the phone call. I phoned him and he basically burst into tears when I told him that I'd got my degree. And then I went to go and resign from my boss at the time. My boss sat me down, and the minute I said I'm resigning, he said, "I'm not accepting that." And I said, "What do you mean you're not accepting that?" I said, "Well, look, I studied a BSc IT. I've always been technical. I want to get back into developing software and stuff. I don't want to sell photocopiers." I said, even though I'm pretty good at it, it's not where I see myself going. And he then said to me, "Look, you control 6 of my top 10 accounts. I'm not letting you go. Why don't we start an IT consultancy business? It's called Electron Computing. And you can consult to my photocopier business, and we can start doing what you love and your passion on the side, and let's see where it goes." Anyway, that grew to 65 people. So in 4.5 years, it grew to 65 people. We developed software that competed against Goldmine and ACPAC back in the day. So we also then diversified and got involved in hardware. So we had the rights to a little product called Flybook. We rebranded the business, called it Flybook South Africa. We had the distribution rights to distribute the product through EMEA as well as Asia Pac. So it was the first 8.5-inch notebook in the world that had a SIM card, handwriting recognition. It swiveled. It was the iPhone before the iPhone came out. So it came out when BlackBerry was there. We distributed that for 2.5 years. So the business almost split. We had the distribution and we still had the consultancy side. And I came to exhibit in CeBIT, I think it was CeBIT 2004 or 2005. We actually signed a consignment order with Vodafone and Optus for 5,000 units. And I'll never forget, I went back to South Africa and thought to myself, geez, I'm going to be one of those younger tech millionaires. And unfortunately, it taught me a very hard lesson. You have to diversify in business, because about 6 months later, I got a call on the same day from both product owners from Vodafone and Optus telling me that there was this new product that they'd heard about called the iPhone coming out, and they were going to put our consignments on hold. And given we hadn't ordered it yet, could they please put it on hold? iPhone came out and basically killed the Flybook business, because that was our market. Our market was emails on the go, tablet PC, that sort of stuff. I went back into the consultancy side of the business, and then things between me and my partner at that stage, that just got to a point where I sold my shares. I went back to being a Sage consultant, Sage CRM and ACPAC consultant. Did that for 3.5 years, and that's how I got the opportunity to come to Australia. Actually, I was at a Sage conference at Champagne Sports Resorts. There was a guy called Kane Murison that was doing a presentation there, and I just went up to him and said, "Look, would you need anyone with my skill set?" And he basically said, "Send me your resume, I'll send it to someone who's looking." And while we were at that conference, as you guys know, conferences are more energetic and lively than some of the Australian conferences. There was a lot of brandy involved and a lot of coke. And he came to me the next day while I was nursing quite a severe headache, aka Babalos, and said to me, "Ryan, the guy wants to talk to you today." He said, "Yeah, because he wants to speak." And this was a Saturday. I was like, "Okay, I'll get on a call this afternoon. I don't know how this is going to go." And in that meeting, I got made an offer to sponsor myself and my girlfriend at the time to come over on a 457 visa. And my girlfriend at the time, which is my wife, she'd already had a visa to go to Adelaide, a state-sponsored visa. And I kind of had to go back to her and say, "Well, look, we either go on the state-sponsored visa or we go on the 457. If we go on the 457, you have to forgo your state-sponsored visa, and you have to believe that I'll do the right thing by you. But we'll go with a job. If not, we'll go without a job, and we'll go to Adelaide and we'll go to a state-sponsored visa." Thankfully, my wonderful wife chose to come with me and chose to come on the job. And the rest was there's a bit of a backstory there, and I don't, excuse me for talking so much, but the backstory.
No. We don't need to interfere. We only here to guide, and if you are on a roll, I think what I do want to know is, as the backstory is, there was a couple of decisions, and I'm thinking it comes from that first part that you met these Australians with Vodafone. I'm sure that where it's come from, why you're here in the first place. But let's hear.
Yeah, no, so we made that decision and I got that opportunity. But even before that, my wife was at work and she used to work for RSM Betty and Dixon as the marketing manager there. And she worked with a lady whose husband was a pastor. And basically, out of the blue, they invited us into their home. And as I told you guys, I grew up with my grandparents and, I grew up with my mom. And at that time, when I got this offer, my grandfather had passed away. So 2 years before I got the offer, he passed away in 2008. And this offer came about in 2010. And my gran was almost on a downward slope. And I was her primary caregiver, looking after her. And I'd gone through some other stuff in South Africa, selling of the business, and things weren't as rosy as they were previously for me. And anyway, this guy, he invited us over to a bra. We went there on a Sunday and he sat us both down. And then after the bra, he said, look, I hope you don't mind me doing this, but I almost had a feeling that I needed to write a letter. God has told me to write you and Steph a letter. And he said, Miranda's told me nothing of what's happening with you guys other than that you guys have an opportunity to potentially go to Australia. And in this letter, he dealt with all sorts of issues that they didn't even know about. The fact that I was leaving my grandmother behind, the fact that new opportunities would be open to us. He basically said, think of it as getting on an airplane and closing the door, and whatever you leave behind, God will make sure that it's in control and it's the right thing. And his message to both of us, both of you will be blessed, but you will be blessed to be a blessing to others. And just see this as an opportunity for that to occur. And I can honestly say, from the time we landed to the time that's come to now, every one of those words spoken over us has happened. From the time we landed here, I had a boss who basically filled my fridge full of food the first day we arrived. We got a place in Neutral Bay right on the water for 3 months that we didn't even know anything about Sydney. And we arrived in this fully furnished place right on the water in Neutral Bay. When we had to go and find our apartment and our furniture and stuff all came along, we'd made friends with the guy downstairs where we bought our coffee. And we were just passing there and we said to him, we got to go out and buy a fridge now for 2 weeks because our fridge is going to still be in storage and that. And he just didn't know us from a bar of soap or anything, said to us, you can take my fridge, lend it for 2 weeks. I know you're going to bring it back. And I was like blown away because I was like, this person that was a stranger had done that. And it was all according to that letter that was written for us, the things that had happened. And it was almost a divine intervention into our lives and calling on what had happened to us. And as I say, we've been blessed as a family ever since. So that was the backstory.
So Ryan, tell us a little bit about your family and who did you bring with you?
I have a 19-year-old daughter. As I said, there were certain decisions that I had to make when I left and got addressed in that letter. She was one of them. So she's a daughter from a previous relationship. I wasn't married, we were engaged, but that just didn't work out. And then I've got a 12-year-old and I've got a 3-year-old that are born in Australia. My 12-year-old, it's always a funny story we tell her. So we were doing up when my wife became pregnant and our PR hadn't come through yet. And I think, as you guys know, if you're born in the country on a 457, you're actually not born as an Australian citizen, even though you're born here. So our PR only came through kind of 3 days after she was born. So I always joke with her and say to her, well, no, you weren't born an Australian, you were born South African. And she gives me that look. And then we got along with my little angel, Mackenzie. She's 3.5 now.
Oh, wow.
And a wonderful addition to the family. So the only two that kind of immigrated, my wife and myself. I do have an uncle in Australia, but he's in Perth. And as you guys know, that's like having someone in a different country, a 6-hour flight away. He's been here a long time. He's a civil engineer. He grew up in my grandparents' home as well and is 21 years older than me and is also like a father figure in my life. But as I say, they're not close to us. We talk on a regular basis, but they live in Perth. So, from a family kind of perspective, it was just my wife and I. And we often talk about that. I think it's made our relationship so much stronger. I think one thing about immigration and immigrating with your partner is that when you get angry with each other, you got nowhere to run, you got no one to phone. You either have to go for a walk on the beach and stew on it and come back and sort it out and just move on. Whereas in SA, I guess you got people to run to, you got people to kind of go and talk to. You got none of that, so it makes you stronger. It actually makes your relationship a whole lot stronger. And yeah, it does cause its own problems, but it does strengthen your partnership.
Funny story. We went through the same thing. Our kids were born here, and we were also on PR. And
Yeah,
I didn't know that. I always thought, because when I grew up, I spent a bit of time in the UK and America. When you're born in those countries, you automatically get citizenship by default because you're born there. And it doesn't work like that in South Africa. So I thought, we were sitting there once just before my son was born, and I think we were at a braai with guys, and I said, oh no, you'll be all right. And they said, no, it doesn't work like that. I said, no, sure, it must work like that. And then I had a look, and no, yep, exactly, he's not going to get his passport, because I said, look, if we have to go back, we go back. At least they've got their passports. Cheap as that, really. Then I flew up and made a big effort and go and sit in the embassy and sorted everything out. So we got our PR, got the papers 2 days before he was born.
Oh, wow.
So as you,
I was the
missed it,
unlucky
I
one.
just made it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now, my wife still remembers. I think my daughter must have been hours old. And there I was getting a photograph taken in the cot so I could ship over a photo to the South African embassy so I could get a South African passport. So then I could get the letter to attach it to the PR.
Yeah.
So that when the PR came through, that it came through for all of us and not just my wife and I. Yeah, I'll never forget it.
Yeah, Ben told that story also in the beginning, and I'm just still thinking that's how close that was for Ben. Unbelievable. But that's interesting. I think that sometimes we assume things and it just doesn't, right?
Correct.
Go get the facts.
Correct.
Yep. So, sorry.
No, carry on.
So I'm trying to now piece it together. So you made a decision to come, and then it was almost like it became a much bigger thing for you to come because there was a bigger reason for you to be here.
Yeah, and
Yep.
and as I said, like elaborating on that, I was implicitly so close to my grandmother. She was like my mother. I was looking after her, and there were decisions that had to be made with her after me leaving. Simple decisions like putting her in an old age home. I'd promised her as long as I was around that never would occur. With me leaving, she actually sat me down and said, my boy, you got to go. You can't pass up this opportunity. Don't worry about that. I'll be fine. That was the first thing. And then the second thing was, at the time, my other daughter was 4 years old. And I think you guys can understand, leaving a child behind is a whole different story. And I guess the confirmation on the higher purpose was just the fact that that's what God wanted me to do, and that all of that would be sorted out.
But she was obviously living with her mom, I would imagine,
Yeah.
and a dad, or a stepdad rather. Okay, when is it that you guys came across then, Ryan? What year was that?
It was 2010, June
2010.
of 2010. So we've been here 15 years. Yeah, what a ride. You arrive here, fresh off the boat. You about Chatswood. I got my ANZ card organized from South Africa, and we had to go and pick it up in Chatswood as we landed.
Right.
You talk about the Chinese influence in Chatswood. Yes, even 15 years ago, we rocked up there and we went into the ANZ branch and there was all Chinese around. And my wife, I'll never forget, looked at me and said, is this Australia? And I went, you're asking me? I'd only been here a couple of weeks when I came in 2004 and 5. I was like, yeah, it must be. Anyway, we were quite perplexed about the Chinese influence in Chatswood. And then our first experience as well, my wife left her mobile in the taxi. And we were able to phone the receipt on the taxi, and the taxi guy brought it back to us. And that night, my wife looked at me and went, wow, we're in the right place. Like, that would never happen. It would have been God, So those little things that happened validated while we were here. But then, the funny aspect of other things that happened, like within the first week, and I think you mentioned it, Anton, when you introduced me. So within the first week, I'm getting settled at work, and We're doing things. The first night we ordered pizzas, and we didn't know the cost of living here or anything. Anyway, we ordered pizzas and we ordered delivery, and we're tired. And the guy rocks up at the front door and he says to me, "Oh, that's $55 for 2 pizzas."
What?
And I looked at him and I went, "No, you're joking." But they were like these jumbo pizzas. And then I said, $55? Are you sure you got the right order? That is like, I would be feeding my entire family of 6 in South Africa. Because, when you immigrate, the first couple of months, you're still converting. Everything you convert. And, 55, when we came over, the exchange rate was 6.5. But still, 55 times 6.5, like 400 Rand for 2 pizzas. I basically almost fainted. Anyway, that happened. And then the very next night, I went to work. My wife was at home still looking for a job at the time, and came back at night. We had dinner, and we had a unit that I told you, Neutral Bay, but it was one of these units where there were 6 units inside, but there was a front-facing door that faced onto the road into where the bus stop was. Anyway, at about 9 o'clock, we're getting ready to get into bed. And my wife says to me, "Oh, geez, Ron, did you lock that front door? Because the front door's not locked. Like, our door's locked, but the front door's not locked." I was like, "Oh, no, you're right. I better go and lock it." Anyway, go outside, lock the door, come back, lock my door, go to sleep, go to work the next day. Next minute, at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I get a call from the strata management. "Hi, is that Mr. Walker?" "Yeah, that's Mr. Walker speaking." "Mr. Walker, we just want to let you know, was there any reason you locked the other people out of their apartments last night?" I said, "What do you mean?" She's like, "No, well, the front door. Why would you lock the front door? Because no one's got a key to the front door other than the strata management. And is there a reason that you locked the front door?" And look, I sheepishly just said to her, "Well, the only reason I locked the front door is because I'm South African and we've just immigrated. And unfortunately, we thought it was unsafe to have that front door open." And she found it quite amusing at the time, thank goodness. And we went forward with that. But yeah, those are just, some of the funny stories that us as South Africa, it was just a totally different world for us to be and to experience in terms of the crime and that sort of stuff. And yeah, a very funny story.
Very good. I must say, yeah, Anton and I often spoke about it. The conversion thing, that's really tough in the beginning when you're still working with rands. And my wife always jokes with me because she says, "We've been here 25 years and I still elect sometimes." I go, "You know how much that is in Rand?"
I actually do the same. You guys, being in Sydney, you would understand. And I've been blessed enough to own a house in Sydney on the northern beaches. And I sometimes daydream, and then I go and look at Cape Town, and I'm like, that wine farm that I wanted to own all the time. And I do the conversions. I'm like, I'm not that far away. And then I stop daydreaming and come back to reality. But yeah, I think it's natural in us. It's just, unfortunately, the depletion of the rand has even made it worse. And I think the rand's only going one way still. But yeah, I think I'll still kind of do some of that today, even 15 years later. People sometimes ask me, there's some of us that come over and that lose their accent. Yeah. And I've got a theory on that. I don't know whether my theory is correct or it's incorrect, but it's been proven right. Even though I grew up in English, as I said, I've got very staunch Afrikaans heritage. And my theory on this is that the Afrikaans guys who come over, English is their second language. So when the Afrikaans guys start speaking English here, they start picking up more of the Australian colloquialisms because it's their second language. Whereas the English guys that come over actually never, ever really lose their South African deep accent because English is their first language.
Yeah, absolutely. I subscribe to that 100%, and I've used it so many times, and I agree totally with you. I mean, we've got relatives who comes from the West Coast there, Piketberg in South Africa. I mean, if you listen to them now, they sound much more Aussie.
Yeah.
Like I always said, they always used to speak English in a bit of self-defense. That's the only time they spoke English. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of people say to me, "Geez, Rod, you still with a very strong South African accent." And I'm like, yeah, I don't think it'll ever go away. It's just the fact that I'm born English. It will be with me for the rest of my life.
Yeah, so Ryan, obviously there were times, I'm sure, that when you came across in the beginning, maybe Challenging times obviously don't always work exactly the way that one wants to. And so, how did you deal with that during that time? People will listen to you and think you got the silver spoon, they will say that, and everything just worked out for you and so on. And then we'll go back to your value that says nothing comes easy. And making a life in a foreign country, and actually an entrepreneur. What were the challenges that you deal with, and how did you cope with that?
Yeah, the first thing I'm going to say is the Australian culture is extremely cliquey, and it's very hard to get in. It's extremely difficult to make friends here. It's extremely difficult to get settled, and immigration is extremely hard. I always say this to people I sponsor. I've sponsored a few South Africans that have come over, and before I even let them come over, I have maybe four kind of interviews with them where I go through with them just how hard immigration is. I'm going to say it is not for sissies. You know, anyone listening to that, it's the best decision you'll ever make, but it is not for sissies. And if anyone tells you that it's not hard, they are lying to you, because it's extremely hard. You come here, you don't have a friendship circle. You're leaving most part of it, your family behind, unless you've got family here. And how did we make it work? We made it work, first of all, by getting involved in the church circle. So that helped us. And that church circle was like our support structure in the first couple of years. I was also fortunate enough to befriend an Aussie in South Africa who at the same time came back to Sydney with me. And I got involved in his circle of friends. But even to this day, some of his circle of friends are extremely cliquey. I'm very positive about what happened to us because of how I look back on where I would have been in South Africa. But I certainly just didn't get it given to me. There were very late night working. My wife and I had to establish a new dynamic. She came here without a job. I came with a job. In the early days as an immigrant, I had to prove myself. I was on a 457 visa. I got given an opportunity by my boss at the time, who was wonderful. He sponsored my immigration. He gave me PR. He sponsored that for me. But I had to prove myself. Like, I had to make sure my billable hours were up, that I was making the company money. You know, I was working 11 to 14-hour days. I was proving that I could do it here. That then set me up for the next stage. And those initial years were just years of extremely hard work. And if I reference back to what I started off saying to you guys, what set me up was the foundation of how I was brought up. I can tell you right now, if I wasn't brought up the way I was brought up, I wouldn't have made it. And I don't think my family would have made it here, because immigration is an extremely lonely journey with you and your partner. And you have to sort out how you're going to create the new dynamic. And what I mean by the new dynamic is, I think if you're doing fairly well in South Africa, it's even harder for you to immigrate. We came without very large assets and stuff. So we only had a townhouse back in South Africa. And because I'd sold my business, I'd sold all of that and certain things. I think the more assets you have and the more affluent you have in South Africa to immigrate, the harder it is. And it's because you're more established over there. You're never going to get the house the same size here that you would have got in South Africa. To a certain extent, even though with all the crime and with all the other nonsense, life in South Africa is still quite easy on other things. You still have domestic help. You still have potential help in your garden. You still have family help. Your dynamics at home become a lot more stringent on immigration, and especially when you start having a family. You know, the role between your wife and you as a husband. In a South African context, because you have those other things, it's easier. You can go for a run on a Saturday because potentially you have a domestic worker that you could leave with your children for 1 or 2 hours, or you've got family members. Here, your wife and I have to then start working out the dynamic of who gets to go and run and look after the kids and do the washing and clean and do everything else on a Saturday, while the other one gets to go and have maybe a run or go and watch the rugby in my case, or do sport. And it's those dynamics which are extremely hard on us as South Africans when you immigrate. My next advice is, in the first couple of years, do not gravitate straight back to the South African community. Use them as leverage and as friendship, but try and, even though it is cliquey, try and establish other communities that you're friends with. Because if you don't do that, you're always looking backwards instead of looking forwards. And for me, I'm a passionate South African. I'm really passionate about Southern Crossings. I'm passionate about what the foundations of that is. But I've only become so passionate of late after being here for 15 years. I didn't gravitate towards that purposely because I would have constantly looked back. And it's the little things. Like I still played rugby when I immigrated. I started playing rugby here in Australia. But even though I loved playing rugby here, for 10 years, I played for Knox Old Boys, played first grade, helped coach them, do a whole range of things for them. But I still missed that fierce of a rugby game on a Saturday with a Boerewors roll on a side and a castle lager. That was not here. But if I'd looked back, then I wouldn't have done that here. So that's just my guidance.
Yeah, I tell you what, I did the same. I stopped playing when I was in South Africa, and then I came over. I was in my mid-30s or so. I started playing a bit, and I didn't really want to play, but I had a mate who played, and he said, come on, play with us. They nag and go on, and yeah, all right, I'll play. But I had a rule. I said I only play fly-half because I don't want to tackle, etc. So, but I tell you what, I definitely don't miss that Sundays after a rugby game, being sore.
Yeah. So I only gave up 3 years ago. I've been playing ever since, and also another funny story. So I always played fullback in my younger years, and then when I got a bit older and a bit bigger, I was a very small flanker, number 6 in South Africa. We're big there. We're big boys, and I always weighed between 98, 102 back in those days when I was at least a little bit less body fat. And I came over. The first practice I went to, the guy looked at me and he said, you're exactly what we need. And I was like, I looked behind me and I thought, great, you need another Lucy. And he said, no ways, you playing second row. And I said, you got to be kidding, right? He said, no, man, you're the perfect height. You're just going to slot in right here at second row. And I said, listen, I got to be honest with you. You want me to play lock? I must be the smallest lock you're ever going to have. It's just not where I play. And he said, no, don't worry about it. You'll see you're in perfectly. And anyway, long story short, that season I ended up playing number 4 for them. And it was I realized it was a totally different game. They played Pirate.
Yeah, but that's a good thing, to use those, whatever it is, whether it's a sporting organization, whether it's the kids or whether it's a church, but you use those communities, and that's where you can make really good friends and fit in.
Yeah, and that's what helps. That's the stuff that helps. But as I say, immigration is very tough. And it's not for sissies.
Ryan, I think that what I like about your story that we've heard here, and it's fascinating, I really appreciate the advice that you gave. It's very pointed advice and very clear. And I think the biggest takeout for me out of that is balance, in the sense that, yes, go to your South African friends, but make sure you are now living in Australia. So there's 2 sides to it. And I think what you've done is you have said, I've got a strong base, and my base is sitting in my faith. That's what you are saying. And then you say from there onwards, I work hard and I don't take anything for granted. And you coming on a podcast like this with a very positive attitude, there are plenty of things that you could say that didn't work out, that was hard. I mean, leaving your daughter in South Africa must have been quite a story. I mean, you've got your grandmother and all of that sort of stuff, and it must have been really, really hard. But, I just want to thank you for your time here. It's been a fascinating story and certainly one of resilience. But I think the biggest thing for me is that you've got principles, you've got values, you've got faith, and you're living those. And so thank you for your time, Ryan.
Yeah, and thank you, Anton, and thank you, Ben, and thank you for allowing me to share my story. As I say, I always get quite excited about it because you're quite right. I think in anyone's life, we can always look and we can either focus on the positives or focus on the negatives. And I think one day when we all meet our maker, we need to look at the positives in our life and look at the journey that was given to us and how we made the most of what was given to us. And that's certainly what I try to do every day. It's not easy. Some days are tougher than others. It's been a pleasure meeting you guys. And then back to the South African roots perspective, I think we've got a wonderful culture in South Africa. We make things happen. We make a plan. And I think that's my last message to everyone is when you get here, make a plan and make it happen.
That's right.
Fantastic, mate. That's a good positive note to end on and quite inspiring. So, listen, thanks a lot from my side as well. It's nice to meet you, nice to have a chat. And yeah, it's always good to hear good stories and people taking the positive out of life. So, good stuff.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Anton.